Like dream. Look at it.
Yep, I did it. I got my giant cube to EMF Camp. Let me walk you through how it happened. Alright, it is Wednesday the 15th of July. The time is 10 minutes to 11. It's going to take me about 3 hours to get to Easter. And I'm in the van with the cube. You can't see the cube. This window does nothing. It's just a thing behind there. But yeah, the cube is in there. EMF Camp is in Eastnor, near Ledbury, in Herefordshire. And yes, that is one of those British place names where you kind of just have to know how to pronounce it. Herefordshire? No, Herefordshire. I suppose it's not as bad as Worcestershire. Anyway, I set off from Cambridge, so it took a few hours to get there. But through the magic of editing, I'm already there. Woo! I've arrived. I've got a wristband. It is 15:23. I've been here for about half an hour now, waiting for a queue of cars to move. It is now moving. I might get on site soon. Yeah, when I finally arrived at the field, there was a HGV on site, so all other traffic was put in a queue and held for a while. When I eventually was allowed on site, I found out where to go, I got the van in place, and unloaded everything. I pitched my tent so it would be ready for when I was done with the cube, and then I got to work on assembling the cube. A friendly cat girl came along to help out, and so all of the hard parts were made easier by the extra pair of hands. Once assembly was almost complete, I discovered a major problem with the cube, and that needed fixing. Hello. I'm in my tent. It is 12 minutes to midnight on Wednesday. I've mostly assembled the cube. The edge pieces are not on yet. I need to go and put the edge pieces on tomorrow morning. And I also need to fix a problem that I didn't know was going to be a problem until I found out. Because this is the first time I've assembled the whole cube. I found out by assembling the whole cube that the sender card can't drive all of those panels in the shape that I want them to. So they're going to have to be a different shape, which is fine, but I need to fix the software so that it works. Was not expecting this at all. Maybe I should have been. Anyway, I'll fix it tomorrow, which is not too long away now. And then hopefully we'll have a working cube. What's this? An excuse to spend lots of time explaining something really technical? Don't mind if I do. Let's get into the details. I had designed the software to output a 9x5 grid of square tiles. The LED panels come in two sizes. The smaller size is 0.5 by 0.5 meters, which is exactly the size of one square tile in the output image. The others were 1 meter by 0.5 meters. These oblong panels each fit 2 tiles of the output image. So, in theory, all I had to do was arrange all of the large panels into the output grid in the top left, and then fill in the remaining gaps with the small square panels. Easy, right? Well, I thought so too, but that didn't work out. The reason is actually partly to do with how I wired up the panels, and that is constrained by how the cube is assembled. Before the final face of the cube is attached to the cube, I can easily access the insides to route the wires wherever I like. The unfortunate thing about the way the cube is constructed is that the bolts that hold the faces to the 90-degree brackets must be installed from the back of each face. They need to be tightened from behind. This means that the final face is really awkward to attach to the cube. When we put this face on, we assembled it on the ground, then lifted it into place, connected the wires at each side, and then reached through the gaps between the edges to screw in the bolts. To minimize the amount of effort required to do this, we arranged the wires between the panels such that we were making as few connections as possible. Unfortunately, the power cables caused a bit of a problem here. They aren't quite long enough to do some of the power routing options I'd like, so we had to improvise. The network cables are the important part though. We had 2 chains of network cables. One of them only connected to large panels towards the base of the cube. It had 12 large panels in a ring around the bottom of the cube. The second chain was all the other panels. All the panels on the top face, and then the ring of small panels around the top of the vertical faces. The sender card has 2 ports on it. Each of the chains was connected to 1 port on the sender card. It turns out that this was a slight mistake. Technically, I had connected all of them in a perfectly reasonable way. After all, the software was designed to arbitrarily remap the image to suit any arrangement of panels. But when I tried to apply the configuration to the sender card using the Novastar control software, I got an error message. It told me that some of the panels were beyond the range of one of the ports. This was the moment at which I discovered this was going to be a problem. It turns out that the sender card has a limitation on the size of the bounding box that surrounds all the panels in the arrangement. That limit is smaller than the 9x5 grid of tiles that the software generates. This would have been okay if I was able to arrange the chains into 2 separate rectangles that join together to make the larger rectangle. But remember how I connected the panels? The first chain was entirely made up of large panels. Since 2 of those on top of each other is only 4 tiles tall, and I can't fit another one underneath without going beyond the 5th row, the optimal way to pack these was like this. But that means that this gap along the bottom needs to be filled with square panels. That's fine, but the chain that those are on will also be filling all the rest of the gaps in the rectangle. So I need to have the second chain have a square panel here, and some panel in this opposite corner, which makes the bounding box for this chain cover the entire image. As mentioned before, this is too big for the sender card. Perhaps I can split up the large panels somehow? Well, I can't rotate them, unfortunately. That would solve the problem if I could, but I can't. So all I could do is break them up, but that only increases the size of the bounding box for that chain. The only way to make the bounding boxes smaller was to tile all of the large panels across 4 rows and across all 9 columns. This leaves some gaps that are filled in by the other chain. This made both of the bounding boxes smaller than the maximum possible size, but they were still too big. The only way to fix this without opening the cube to try and rewire the chains was to change the software so that it could generate a different output shape. So I was going to have to change the software. Fortunately, I brought my laptop with me, which is already set up for working on the code. It actually took much longer than I anticipated to get the whole cube assembled. I hadn't eaten since lunchtime, and the cube assembly continued into the evening. Eventually I had to stop so that I had time to eat. I left it so late that there was exactly 1 takeaway still open in Ledbury. I drove the van there, had my dinner, and then got back to my tent very late in the day. I actually implemented most of the software fix on Wednesday night in my tent, just before I went to sleep. By Thursday morning, I thought I had the software working correctly. Turns out I hadn't quite got it right while I was desperate to get to sleep after a very tiring day. It was early afternoon by the time I had all the bugs fixed and the video output calibrated on the real cube. Shortly after that happened, I got one of the power team to come by with a current meter and tell me how much power I was drawing. I was pleasantly surprised that at full brightness with the standard color scheme I was only drawing 12 amps from the mains. That's not even 3 kilowatts. That's about what an electric kettle draws when it's boiling water. I'm going to be boiling a kettle constantly for the entire weekend. This should be well within the limits of all of the equipment, both inside and outside of the cube. I even got a QA sticker to say that the cube had passed inspection. This is a picture of the cube shortly after that inspection. Maximum brightness, showing that it can stand up to the midday sun and say, yeah, so what, I'm brighter than you. The cube is actually really hard to photograph in the daylight. Those stripes near the bottom are an artifact of the photography process. The cube looked rock solid steady to my human eyes. After that, it was time to install the edge assemblies so that people could actually play on the cube. The Thursday is the first day that regular visitors are allowed on site. It goes from being a construction site to being a campsite. There's nothing much scheduled on Thursday, so it's mostly when people arrive and get set up. The real fun starts on Friday, so I wasn't too fussed about the cube not being ready to play yet. Before the edges are in place, it's just a glorified LED video cube. When I finally got all the edges installed, I discovered 2 issues with them. The first was that the elastic bands I had put on the paddles as part of the return to center mechanism had all perished. I guess leaving them outside day and night in the direct sun for a few months before the event wasn't a good idea. I had brought spares, but not enough of them to replace all the bands. That was a problem. The other issue was that one of the edge pieces had a short circuit between two of the pins, and that manifested as only being able to push the E slice of the cube in one direction. This is because both switches would activate a pair of input pins simultaneously, and one of them would consistently win. The slice would move in the direction of the one that won. So, on Thursday afternoon, the cube was almost up and running. I had run out of steam for debugging things, so I stopped there for a little while with the paddle issues. I started to assemble the PC under the gazebo, which would present the UI for automatically scrambling the cube and timing a solve. This was also meant to let you choose the theme for the cube. The options are the standard Rubik's coloring, or a colorblind friendly mode, which has a slightly more colorblind friendly color palette and symbols on 5 of the 6 colors. Another little bit of failed forward planning. I only ever tested the software for this on my laptop and not on the Raspberry Pi 400 that I was using as a cheap PC for deploying in the field. The Raspberry Pi does not support OpenGL. It only supports OpenGL ES, which is a somewhat reduced variant of OpenGL for embedded devices. I had already added support for GLES, but neglected to try compiling it after making lots of changes to the code, so I had a lot of bugs to fix before it would run. Eventually I got this working, and then the only problem to fix was the edges. I grabbed my multimeter to beep out the short circuit, and eventually found that one of the edge assemblies had a short circuit inside the box where the connectors are for plugging into the PC inside the cube. There was a single strand of the multi-core wire that had reached over to the next pin along, so that meant the only thing that needed fixing was the elastic bands. On Friday morning, I went to 3 different shops in Ledbury before I found one selling elastic bands. I had to make sure I had enough to last if they started breaking again, so finally, by Friday mid-afternoon, I had the cube fully working. Oh yeah, getting to that stage meant fixing this too. I'm not sure exactly what happened, because I didn't see it happen, but I think I know the likely story. Being what it is, a big glowing cube with things you can grab onto and fiddle with to make it do stuff, it tends to attract small children. These small children are significantly shorter than the cube. They have to jump up to reach the paddles on the top edges. I suspect that a small child jumped up to grab a paddle, successfully grabbed said paddle, but then failed to let go of the paddle once gravity had done its thing. These paddles are not made of particularly robust materials, and the design itself has some physical weaknesses. This is a problem that I need to solve if I want to deploy this cube again at another event. For now though, all I could do was replace the paddles as they broke. I brought lots of spare parts, so this was manageable. The cube was incredibly bright. Full brightness on those LED panels is really bright indeed. It was running happily at full brightness for a little while, and then when I came back to it a bit later in the afternoon, I found that it had tripped a circuit breaker. Given that it was only drawing 12 amps, I thought it would be fine. I'm not sure why the circuit breaker tripped. I tried turning it on again, but then the upstream breaker tripped. This is a little frustrating, but I think I can resolve this before the next event that the cube goes to. Anyway, I decided to unplug half the panels so that I could actually boot it up again without tripping another breaker. I then dialed the brightness all the way down to 25% and then added back the other panels. I probably could have stuck with a higher brightness, but I wanted to play it safe. It's a real pain to reset the circuit breakers inside the cube. It requires removing an edge piece and then reaching deep inside with one arm. The reduced brightness did make it harder to play in sunlight. It was no longer super clear and now was only really playable with color blindness friendly mode. However, the cube got big crowds at night when 25% brightness was plenty bright. I did eventually get the PC under the gazebo working too. This meant people could start actually competing for fast solve times. I should have been logging each solve so that I could have some stats on how many people solved it and how fast. I do know some stats for you though. The fastest solve was just over 1 minute and 24 seconds. This was done by someone who came back to the cube again and again to practice solving it throughout the weekend. They didn't want to be in this video, so I can't show you that particular solve, but it did involve a fairly lucky arrangement of the last layer. I did capture a few other attempts on camera, and one completion. I regularly checked in on the cube throughout the weekend, in between all the other things I wanted to do. I did have to repair the cube a bunch of times. I think I counted 7 catastrophic paddle switch disasters in total. I did get plenty of time to enjoy the event though. Partied in the Null sector on Friday night, attended some interesting talks, and had a lot of fun chats with various cool people, mostly while standing near the cube. My favourite musical performance was from Los Patmaritas, who had Latin American chiptunes to dance along to. If you saw someone fall to the floor and then fail to stand up twice after attempting to limbo under his impromptu limbo wire, well, that was me. Sorry I didn't get that on camera for you, it would have been hilarious, I'm certain of it. Oh, and I got a selfie with Jonty on the dance floor. For those who don't know, Jonty is one of the founders of EMF Camp. He's basically the face of EMF Camp at this point. So that was it. The cube was a success. I got it fully working, and people enjoyed it for the whole weekend. I had to fix it a bunch of times, but I did keep it going the whole time. On Monday morning, it was sad to have to say goodbye to the event for another 2 years, but I packed up the cube back into its many boxes and started the long journey home. Most people didn't see the delay in getting onto site, the unexpected problem with the sender card, the trip to Ledbury to get elastic bands, the 7 times I had to repair paddle switches, and the late night coding sessions fixing the things I'd neglected to test. What I wanted people to see was a working LED cube, and for several days, that's exactly what they saw. I'm very satisfied with the results. All of the effort behind the scenes was absolutely worth it. Thank you to everybody that helped out with making this cube happen. Thanks for listening to me ramble about my cube for so long. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos. Also, let me know in the comments if you have any fun ideas for what to do with a giant LED cube. I kind of just have this thing now, and I can go construct it anytime I like for fun shenanigans. So, give me ideas for fun shenanigans, I guess.